It is the 18th of July, 1944, and the Normandy Bocage is doing what it always does, strangling the life out of an armored advance. The hedgerows stand 3 meters high in places, great earthen walls threaded with root and bramble that have been growing since the Normans themselves were alive. Between them run sunken lanes barely wide enough for a cart. In these lanes, men die. Panzerfausts wait in the shadows, machine gun nests sit behind every bend, and somewhere to the east, near a ruined sugar factory outside the town of Bocage, a British armored column is preparing to push forward in a vehicle that frankly looks as though it was designed by a committee that had never seen a tank before. It sits low to the ground, almost comically wide across its rear, with a squat, ungainly turret positioned far back on the hull, as though an afterthought. It bristles. That is the only word for it. Where other tanks carry a single gun, or perhaps a coaxial machine gun as a secondary armament, this thing carries so many weapons pointing in so many directions that it resembles less a fighting vehicle and more a rolling porcupine that has had a disagreement with a scrapyard. Soldiers who see it for the first time often laugh. The Germans who encounter it in the Bocage do not laugh for long. This is the A-27M Cromwell. Wait, no, back up, because the vehicle we are actually discussing today is something stranger, something altogether more British in its peculiar genius. This is the Churchill Crocodile, and in the space of a single afternoon in the summer of 1944, one troop of these machines will account for 47 confirmed German vehicle kills, the flaming surrender of an entire fortified position, and a psychological shock that will reverberate through Wehrmacht communications for weeks. The question worth asking is not how a tank this ugly managed to accomplish something so dramatic. The question is how on earth it came to exist at all. To understand the Crocodile, you have to understand the particular hellishness of the fighting that preceded it. By 1942, British military planners were already studying the tactical problem that would define the coming invasion of Europe: hardened defensive positions. The Atlantic Wall, Hitler's great concrete barrier along the coastline, was one part of the problem. But the deeper issue was what lay behind it: the network of fortified farmhouses, concrete bunkers, reinforced cellars, and interlocking fields of fire that German engineers were extraordinarily good at constructing. A standard tank gun could demolish a building, certainly. High explosive rounds could crack concrete given enough time and ammunition. But in the Bocage, in the villages, in the urban fighting that everyone knew was coming, there was a specific tactical problem that no conventional weapon addressed cleanly. How do you clear a fortified room, a reinforced cellar, a bunker with a steel door, without losing the infantry storming it? Conventional infantry solutions, grenades, satchel charges, direct assault, cost lives at a horrifying rate. The casualty figures from Pacific Island fighting, where American Marines were already encountering similar fortification problems against Japanese defenders, were reaching British planners and making for grim reading. Something was needed that could suppress a position so totally, so completely, that the defenders' will to resist simply ceased before the assault even began. The answer, developed at Farnborough and refined by the 79th Armored Division under the eccentric and visionary Major General Percy Hobart, was to take fire and attach it to a tank. The Churchill Crocodile began with the Churchill tank itself, which by 1943 was already a well-understood machine, if not a particularly glamorous one. The Churchill was slow. Its maximum speed was roughly 15 miles per hour on a good road, which Normandy rarely provided. But it was extraordinarily heavily armored for its era, and possessed of a remarkable ability to cross difficult ground. Where faster, thinner-skinned tanks bogged down or threw tracks in the deep Norman mud, the Churchill simply ground forward. It was, in the language of the time, a reliable brute. Hobart's engineers at the 79th recognized something useful in that reliability. The Churchill could carry a tremendous additional weight burden without its automotive system giving up entirely. What they attached to it was a trailer, This sounds mundane until you understand what the trailer contained. 400 imperial gallons of highly pressurized petroleum mixture. A thickened petroleum mixture not entirely unlike what the Americans were developing simultaneously as napalm, though the British formulation had its own particular characteristics. The trailer, a squat armored box on two wheels, connected to the tank via a steel armored pipe that ran beneath the hull, through a special coupling at the rear, and forward to a projector mounted in place of the hull machine gun. The projector itself was unimpressive to look at, a short, wide nozzle that would not have looked out of place on a civilian fire engine. What it produced was not unimpressive at all. When the Crocodile's operator opened the valve and fired the igniter, pressurized nitrogen gas forced the fuel gel down the pipe and through the nozzle at a velocity sufficient to project a continuous stream of burning liquid to a range of between 80 and 120 yards, depending on conditions. The flame itself burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The thickened gel was specifically formulated to adhere to surfaces, to cling to concrete, to pour through apertures, to flow around corners and fill enclosed spaces. It did not simply scorch a target, it consumed it. A single 2-second burst from a Crocodile could fill a standard German bunker aperture with enough burning material to render the interior uninhabitable in moments. The tank carried enough fuel for approximately 80 such bursts before the trailer was exhausted. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The manufacturing of the Crocodile system was coordinated primarily through facilities in the Midlands, with the trailer units assembled separately from the tank conversions. Exact production figures remain partially classified even today, though estimates suggest somewhere between 800 and 1,000 complete units were produced before the end of the war, with the conversion work carried out on standard Churchill Mark VII hulls. Each trailer unit weighed approximately 6.5 tons when fully laden, a significant appendage even for a Churchill, and the armored coupling pipe that connected it was engineered to be jettisoned by the driver from inside the tank if the trailer was disabled or caught fire. This last detail mattered enormously. A burning fuel trailer attached to the rear of a tank was not a complication that allowed for leisurely decisions. Operationally, the Crocodile was deployed almost exclusively by the 79th Armored Division, Hobart's famous formation of specialist armored vehicles that also included the swimming DD tanks, the mine-clearing crabs, and the various AVREs. The Crocodile troops were trained to work in close cooperation with infantry, typically operating in sections of 3 tanks, 2 standard Churchill gun tanks to provide conventional fire support and suppression, and 1 Crocodile to deliver the decisive blow once the flanking fire had pinned the defenders. The tactical doctrine that emerged from the training grounds and refined in Normandy was deceptively simple. The gun tanks would engage the target from the front, forcing the defenders to keep their heads down behind their apertures. The Crocodile would work around to an oblique angle, never head-on, since a direct shot into the projector nozzle was a theoretical vulnerability, and close to effective range. Then, the operator would fire. The results, documented in after-action reports with a clinical detachment that barely conceals the horror of what is being described, were consistent. Defenders either died in the first burst or abandoned their positions within seconds. What the reports capture less well is the psychological dimension, which was arguably more significant than the material one. German infantrymen were trained to deal with tanks. They were not trained to deal with tanks that breathed fire. The sound of a Crocodile projecting, a deep, roaring exhalation, audible above the noise of engines and small arms, became, within weeks of the Normandy landings, a specific and recognized signal among German defenders. The word that appeared in captured communications and prisoner interrogations was Flampanzer, flame tank. The appearance of one in the vicinity of a defensive position frequently produced surrender before any actual firing took place. No direct German equivalent achieved comparable operational impact. The Wehrmacht operated its own flame weapons. The Flamethrower 35 and its successors were standard infantry equipment. But a man-portable flamethrower had a range of perhaps 25 to 30 meters and required its operator to stand in the open. German armored flamethrower conversions existed, most notably on early Panzer II chassis, but these had been phased out by 1944 as inadequate for the evolving war. The American M4 Sherman-based flame conversions, while useful in the Pacific theater against Japanese fortifications, were less heavily armored than the Churchill and therefore more vulnerable in the close-range engagements where flame weapons were necessarily employed. To return, then, to that July afternoon in 1944, the Bocage, the sunken lanes, the farmhouses with meter-thick stone walls and German machine gunners behind every window. The Churchill Crocodile grinds forward at its unhurried maximum pace, trailing its ungainly armored cart, looking for all the world like something assembled in a hurry from components that were not quite meant for each other. And then it stops, and then it opens its valve, and then the lane ahead of it becomes something that no amount of concrete or earthen bank or disciplined Waffen-SS training has prepared anyone to resist. 47 vehicles, one afternoon, the ugliest British tank ever built, doing the one thing it was made to do with a thoroughness that made aesthetics entirely irrelevant. There is a lesson in that, somewhere, about the relationship between beauty and purpose. The crocodile did not need to be admired, it only needed to work.